Every afternoon, an old man could be seen sitting on a park bench, a worn notebook resting beside him. A small sign hung around his neck. Free counseling, listening to all ages. He never spoke much. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to draw people in. People from all walks of life. Students with backpacks, workers with tired eyes, those carrying burdens too heavy to share. They all came and they all sat beside him. No one knew much about him, not his past, not his name. But one thing was clear. He had been there for a long time, and in his silence, he had a way of mending the broken. The first visitor. The student searching for peace. One late afternoon, a young student sat beside the old man. He had a heavy backpack, and his eyes were downcast. The pressure of school had been building up, and with every passing day, it felt like it was crushing him. He didn't speak. He just sat there staring at the ground. The old man didn't rush him. He simply sat in the silence, allowing the boy to be. After what felt like an eternity, the boy sighed deeply, the weight of his thoughts spilling out with the breath he'd been holding in. Finally, he spoke. "I'm afraid I won't make it. I've been trying so hard, but I feel like I'm failing." His voice cracked, revealing the vulnerability he had been hiding. The old man didn't answer right away. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his worn notebook. On the first empty page, he wrote just a few words. "You're doing your best." The boy read the words. At first, he didn't understand, but then the weight began to lift just slightly. He realized it wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, and sometimes that was enough. The worker's burden, and next afternoon a weary worker sat down beside the old man. His hands were rough from labor, his face tired from the long hours he'd spent at work. He wasn't looking for advice. He wasn't looking for answers. He just needed a moment to sit, to breathe. The old man didn't speak, only gave him a quiet nod, acknowledging his presence. The worker looked at the ground, his eyes clouded with frustration and exhaustion. After a long while, he finally spoke. "Life feels like it's all work, all the time. I come home and I don't even know what I'm working for anymore. My family, my kids, they need me. But I can't be there, not the way they deserve." The old man nodded gently, never saying a word. Sometimes words weren't necessary. The silence was enough. The worker felt his shoulders ease, his tension melting as he sat in that silence. Finally, the old man gestured toward the sky. The worker followed his gaze, seeing the fading light of the afternoon. "The world doesn't expect you to carry everything," the old man's eyes seemed to say. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up." The worker exhaled deeply, his heart feeling just a little lighter. The quiet healing. As the days passed, more people came and went. Some sat in silence, some spoke. But in every encounter, the old man simply listened. He didn't offer grand advice. He didn't try to fix anything. He gave people what they needed most, a space to be heard. One day, a woman came to sit next to him, her face etched with sorrow. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were distant, as if the weight of her thoughts had left her too tired to speak. The old man waited. He didn't push her to talk. He just allowed her to be. After a long while, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my husband last year, and I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to be okay without him." The old man didn't say anything. He simply reached for his notebook, wrote a few words, and handed it to her. "You're not alone." She stared at the words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt her heart begin to heal. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. A space to breathe. The park bench became more than just a place to sit. It became a sanctuary. People came with their burdens, their broken pieces, and sat beside the old man in silence. And in that silence, they found something they hadn't known they were looking for: peace. He never spoke much, he never gave advice, but his presence was enough to make people feel like they mattered, like they weren't alone in the world. Some people left after a few minutes, others stayed longer. But in every case, the old man healed them without saying a single word. And in the process, he healed himself too. He realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't advice or solution or issues. It's simply the gift of being present, of listening, of allowing someone to be exactly who they are in that moment. And so the old man continued to sit on the park bench, offering his quiet healing to anyone who needed it, day after day. And though the world moved on around him, he remained a constant, a reminder that sometimes the best way to heal is simply to listen. The park bench was still the same: weathered wood, worn down by years of people coming and going, and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Each day, it seemed to hold more and more stories, not written in books, but etched into the fabric of the people who sat there. One afternoon, a man in his 40s sat down on the bench beside the old man. His hands were rough from years of manual labor, and his clothes were covered in dust from the day's work. He had the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many years working without pause. His shoulders sagged, and he looked as though the weight of the world was on him. The old man didn't speak at first. He simply nodded in acknowledgement, inviting the man to sit in silence. For a while, they both just looked ahead, watching as people walked past, lost in their own thoughts. After some time, the man sighed deeply and looked at the old man. "I don't know why I'm here," he said, his voice heavy. "I've been working for years. Same job, same routine, day in and day out. I don't know if it's worth it anymore." The old man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the man. He could see the exhaustion in the worker's eyes, not just physical fatigue, but something deeper, a sense of lost purpose. The worker continued, his voice quieter now. "I used to have dreams. I used to want something more. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what those dreams were. Now it's just work, and I don't even know if I'm doing it for me anymore. I think I'm doing it for everyone else." There was a long pause. The old man didn't speak. He simply took out his notebook and wrote something on the first page. He handed it to the worker. It read, "It's okay to stop and breathe. You are not defined by what you do. You are defined by who you are." The worker read the words slowly, and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just looked at the old man, his eyes filling with something unspoken. The truth of those words seemed to sink in deeply. "I've never really thought about it that way," the worker said softly. "I guess I've been so focused on providing, on surviving, that I've forgotten to live. I've been living for everyone else, but not for me." The old man gave a gentle nod. No words were needed. The worker looked down at the ground, then back up at the sky. The world seemed quieter now, as though the park bench, the old man's presence, and the silence had given him permission to let go, even just for a moment. He stood up slowly, as if something inside him had shifted. He felt lighter, not because of any grand revelation, but because he had been given the space to pause and reflect. "Thank you," the worker said, his voice more grounded. "I think I needed to hear that more than I realized." The old man smiled gently, though it was a quiet smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't need words, a smile that said, "It's okay to take a break. It's okay to breathe." The worker turned and walked away, but there was something different in his step now. The weight that had burdened him for so long felt just a little lighter. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the old man sat back on the bench, his eyes following the worker as he walked away. The bench had once again served its purpose, not with grand gestures or advice, but with quiet understanding. He had simply listened, and that was enough. The park continued to bustle around him, but in that moment, the old man felt a sense of peace. He knew that his job was not to fix people, but to give them space, space to heal, space to think, and space to breathe. And as long as people came to the bench, there would always be stories to listen to, stories that needed no fixing, just understanding. The park was quieter than usual, with only a few scattered people walking by. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the path. It was one of those moments when everything seemed to pause, as though the whole world was holding its breath. Mr. Len sat on his usual spot, the bench he had claimed as his own. His notebook lay open beside him, ready for whatever story might walk through his door, even though he no longer expected them to come with words. That afternoon, a young girl approached. She was around 16, with wide eyes that looked too tired for someone so young. She hesitated at the edge of the bench, looking down at the ground, unsure whether to sit or walk away. Mr. Len didn't speak at first. He simply patted the space next to him, inviting her to sit. She glanced at him, then at the empty space beside him, and slowly lowered herself onto the bench. For a while, neither of them spoke. She sat with her arms crossed tightly, as though shielding herself from something invisible. The breeze played with her hair, but her gaze remained fixed on the ground, distant and unfocused. Mr. Len waited. Finally, the silence became too much for her to bear. She let out a sigh, her shoulders sagging with the weight of everything she'd been carrying. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if anyone can help me." Mr. Len simply nodded. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is allow someone the space to speak without interruption. "I've been so angry," she continued, her voice trembling. "Angry at my parents, angry at my friends, even angry at myself. I can't stand it anymore. I feel like no one hears me, no one sees me, and I don't even know why I'm so mad." Her words came out in a rush, each one tumbling over the other. She wiped away a tear, trying to hide it, but it wasn't enough. The floodgates had opened, and the emotions she had buried for so long began to spill out. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm scared that I'll never be enough, that I'll never find my way. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, and no one seems to care." Mr. Lin didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just sat there beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. She paused, looking up at him as if seeking something, reassurance maybe, or an answer. But he didn't offer any. Instead, he pulled out his notebook and wrote something on the page. He handed it to her without a word. "You don't need to have it all figured out right now." The girl read the words, and for a moment, she simply stared at them. The weight of her own expectations, the pressure to be perfect, had been suffocating her. But those few words, they were a lifeline, a reminder that it was okay to not have all the answers. "You mean it's okay not to know what I want?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. He nodded slowly, a warm, understanding smile on his face. "It's okay, not everyone knows right away. It's a journey, and sometimes the most important part of that journey is just letting yourself breathe." For the first time in what felt like forever, the girl let out a soft breath, as though she had been holding it in for far too long. She looked down at the notebook again and for the first time felt a glimmer of peace. "I think I understand," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I don't have to have everything figured out. Maybe I just need to take one step at a time. The old man simply smiled, a smile that said everything and nothing at once. She stood, her shoulders a little straighter than before. Before she left, she turned back to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I think I needed to hear that." Mr. Len nodded, his eyes twinkling with quiet wisdom. "Remember, sometimes it's enough to just listen to yourself and to those who care." The girl walked away, a little lighter than when she had arrived. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time she felt like she didn't need to. One step at a time. As the evening settled in, the park grew quieter, and the old man sat on the bench, feeling the weight of another story shared, another life touched. It wasn't about solving everything. It was about offering the space to be heard, to be seen. He closed his notebook, his heart full. There was always someone else who needed to be heard. The morning was cool with a crisp breeze rustling the leaves of the trees that had surrounded the park. The benches were nearly empty, save for one lone figure sitting at the far end, an old man, as usual, with his worn notebook and a small sign that read, "Free Counseling, Listening to All Ages." The park had become a place of quiet reflection for the old man. It wasn't about offering solutions or advice. It was about offering a space where people could simply be. And that afternoon, the park had a familiar visitor, one who had sat on the bench months ago, but who had never quite found the peace he was looking for. The worker approached slowly, his steps heavier than before. He was the same man who had come to the bench some time ago, carrying the weight of his labor, his responsibilities, and his regrets. But today he wasn't the same. He had been on a journey since their last conversation, a journey that had led him back here, to this bench, to this old man who listened when no one else did. He stood for a moment looking at the bench. The old man was sitting there, as always, a steady presence in the ever-changing world around them. And without a word, the worker sat down beside him. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed thoughts to settle, that gave room for emotions to breathe. It was the kind of silence that healed. The worker finally broke the quiet. "I've been thinking about what you said that day, about not being defined by what I do." The old man nodded, his gaze soft and understanding. He didn't need to prompt the worker. He knew the weight of unspoken words. "I've been working less," the worker continued, his voice tentative but steady. "Not because I don't want to work, but because I'm learning to live more. I've been spending more time with my family, with my kids. I don't want them to grow up thinking the only thing I care about is the next paycheck. I want them to know I care about them, not just about what I can provide." The old man looked at him with quiet approval. It wasn't about the words the worker spoke. It was about the change that had taken place inside of him. The shift from being consumed by work to finding a balance, a sense of meaning beyond the daily grind. "I started painting again," the worker continued, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I used to love painting. I forgot how much it meant to me until I picked up a brush one day just to see if I still could. And it felt good. It felt like I was reconnecting with a part of me that I'd lost." The old man smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. He didn't need to say anything. The worker's story spoke volumes. For the first time, the worker realized he had found something he had been looking for, not just in the external world, but within himself. He wasn't defined by the work he did. He wasn't defined by the struggle or the long hours or the endless chase for more. He was defined by his ability to change, to grow, and to choose a path that honored the parts of himself he had neglected. "I think I understand now," the worker said, looking at the old man with gratitude in his eyes. "I don't need to be everything for everyone. I just need to be enough for myself." The old man nodded, his heart swelling with quiet pride. He didn't need to fix the worker's problems. He didn't need to offer grand advice. He just needed to be there, to listen, to witness, and to help the worker see the strength that had always been inside him. The worker stood up, his heart lighter than when he had arrived. Before leaving, he turned to the old man. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice full of sincerity. "I don't know what it is about you, but I feel like I'm finding pieces of myself I forgot were there." The old man smiled, not in a way that made him seem wise, but in a way that made him seem like someone who truly understood the unspoken things in life. He didn't need to say goodbye. He just watched the worker walk away, a little taller, a little freer. As the worker disappeared into the distance, the old man returned to his spot on the bench. He looked around the park, his heart full of quiet contentment. There would be others who needed to be heard, others who needed the space to simply be. And the old man would be there, always ready to listen. The day was quiet, with only the gentle hum of the city in the distance. It was one of those afternoons where the park felt like an oasis of stillness, a place untouched by the rush of the world outside. The trees swayed lightly in the breeze, and the sun cast long golden rays through the branches, creating patterns on the grass. Mr. Len sat on his usual spot on the bench, his hands resting in his lap. He had been there for hours, watching the world move around him as it always did. People came and went, but he remained, a constant presence in the ever-changing landscape. And then she came, a woman in her mid-30s, her face weary but determined. She walked with a quiet purpose, her shoulders tense, her hands clenched tightly around a leather bag. She glanced at the bench, hesitated, and then slowly sat down next to him. The old man didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, his eyes kind but patient. The woman looked at him briefly and then down at the ground, her hands still gripping the bag tightly. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves above them. The woman seemed lost in thought, her mind racing with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice quiet but heavy with emotion. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been carrying so much for so long, and I don't know who to turn to anymore." Mr. Len didn't answer. He just gave her his full attention, his silence an invitation for her to continue. "I've been holding everything in," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I've been afraid to speak up, afraid to say what I need. I've been afraid that if I say the wrong thing, I'll lose everything. I've been afraid to show people who I really am. So I just stay silent." Her words came out in a rush, as if they had been waiting for years to be set free. The old man didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I thought that if I didn't speak, I wouldn't hurt anyone. I thought if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't cause trouble. But now I feel like I'm suffocating, like I'm disappearing bit by bit, like no one really sees me." There was a long pause. The woman wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. Mr. Len didn't offer her a tissue, didn't speak a word. He simply sat there, letting her find her own way through the silence. After a while, she turned to him, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "How do I find my voice again? How do I stop being afraid to speak?" Mr. Len reached into his notebook and wrote a few words on the page. He handed it to her. "Well, your voice matters, but it starts with speaking to yourself first. The woman looked at the words, and for the first time since she sat down, she felt a flicker of hope. "It starts with speaking to myself," she repeated softly. The old man nodded gently. "You don't need to have all the answers," he said, his voice low and comforting. "But you have to start somewhere. Start by listening to yourself. Start by allowing yourself to speak your truth, no matter how small or fragile it may seem. And when you do, you'll find that your voice has always been there. It was just waiting for you to hear it." The woman stared at the notebook for a moment longer, the weight of his words sinking in. Slowly, she folded the notebook and slipped it into her bag. She sat there for a while, not speaking, but something had shifted. There was a quiet calm in her, something that hadn't been there before. When she stood to leave, she looked at the old man and smiled. A small, tentative smile, but it was real. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steadier now. "I think I'll start with that. I'll start listening." Mr. Len gave her a quiet nod. He didn't need to say anything else. He knew that in time she would find her way. She'd already taken the first step. As she walked away, Mr. Len watched her go. Her steps were lighter than when she had arrived, and though he knew she still had a long road ahead of her, he also knew that she had begun the journey toward finding herself again. The park had a stillness about it that afternoon, the kind of quiet that spoke of secrets buried deep and whispers carried on the wind. The sun had begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the trees and pathways. The park bench, where Mr. Len had spent so many afternoons, seemed to hold the weight of all the conversations, all the stories that had been shared here. Mr. Len sat as usual, his old notebook resting beside him. He had become accustomed to the rhythm of the park. People came and went, their lives intersecting with his for brief moments. Sometimes they found what they needed in his silence. Sometimes they left with a weight lifted, even if they hadn't said a word. But today it was different. Today he found himself sitting alone, reflecting on his own journey. He had listened to so many others, each person with their own burden, their own story, but he realized that he had never truly shared his own. Not in words, anyway. As the minutes passed, Mr. Len thought about the people who had sat next to him, the ones who had come seeking peace, seeking understanding. He thought about the young girl, the worker, the woman who had found her voice. But more than that, he thought about himself, about his own silence, the years of listening to others without allowing himself the space to be heard. The truth he had forgotten. It was a few weeks ago that an old friend had stopped by the park, someone Mr. Len had known long before he started sitting on this bench. They had met by chance, their paths crossing in the most unexpected of ways. The friend had asked him a simple question: "How are you?" Mr. Len had paused for a moment, surprised by the question. He had answered, of course, but only with the usual pleasantries. He had become so accustomed to being the one who listened, the one who gave, that he had forgotten how to answer when the question was directed at him. Now, as he sat on the bench, the weight of that question lingered in his mind. How am I? He had spent his life helping others find their way, but in doing so, he had neglected his own path. He had listened so intently to the stories of others, so deeply engaged in their pain and joy, that he had forgotten to listen to the quiet whispers of his own heart. And in that silence, he realized something profound. He too needed to heal. He too needed to hear his own voice. The woman who came to visit again. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the woman who had found her voice several days ago returned to the bench. Her face was softer now, her shoulders no longer as hunched as they had been before. She looked at Mr. Len with a sense of quiet confidence, the kind that comes from having spoken one's truth. She sat down beside him, her presence calm and steady. She didn't speak right away. She simply sat, looking at the park, her gaze far away but thoughtful. Mr. Lin turned to her and smiled gently, his eyes softening with recognition. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual but filled with clarity, "about listening to myself. I've started doing it, not just in the big decisions, but in the little moments too, and I think it's helping." Mr. Len nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I've learned that I don't always need someone else to tell me what to do. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to trust myself more. It's still hard sometimes, but I think I'm getting there." She paused, then added, "But I'm still learning to be kinder to myself, to listen with compassion." The moment of reflection, Mr. Len looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that her words were not just for her, they were for him too. Listening to oneself, truly listening, wasn't just about understanding the stories of others. It was about finding the strength to embrace your own story, to accept your own flaws, and to forgive yourself for the things you couldn't change. It was about healing in the quiet spaces, the spaces where words were unnecessary. And it was in those moments of stillness, sitting side by side with others on this bench, that Mr. Len found his own healing. He had spent so many years holding others up that he had forgotten that he too needed support. He had forgotten that listening to his own heart was just as important as listening to the hearts of those who sought him out. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and understanding. She smiled softly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me find my voice, for teaching me to listen to myself." Mr. Len smiled in return, his heart full. "You did the work. I was just here to listen." And as she stood to leave, he watched her walk away with a newfound sense of purpose. She had found her voice, and now she was beginning to find peace. A lesson in listening. As the woman disappeared into the distance, Mr. Len sat back on the bench, his heart a little lighter than before. The park had never felt so alive, even in the quiet. He had listened to others for so long, but now he understood something he had overlooked: the importance of listening to himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. The world continued to move around him, but he felt anchored in the moment. He was not just a listener of others' stories. He was also a listener of his own. And in that listening, he found a peace he had long forgotten. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long, soft beams across the park. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of fresh earth and new beginnings. The usual rustle of leaves and distant chatter filled the space, but today there was an unusual sense of calm. The park seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to fill the silence. Mr. Len sat on his bench, as he had every afternoon, his notebook resting beside him. His eyes watched the world around him, the joggers passing by, the children playing, the occasional person walking their dog. The park was always full of life, but today it felt quieter, almost like the universe was taking a moment to pause and reflect. Then she arrived. The woman who had found her voice in the previous days, the one who had slowly begun to reclaim herself, walked into the park. There was something different about her today, something stronger, more grounded. Her steps were steady, her posture upright, and her eyes held a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She approached the bench slowly, her gaze meeting the old man's. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty. She had come to see him not because she needed answers, but because she had something to share. "May I sit?" she asked, her voice calm and composed. Mr. Len nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. She sat down beside him, a comfortable silence settling between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, together in the quiet, as the park continued to hum with life around them. The power of silence. After a while, the woman spoke, her voice softer than before, but filled with a depth that hinted at growth. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about listening to myself, about how silence isn't something to be afraid of, but something to embrace." She paused, her hands folded in her lap. The old man didn't say anything, but his presence seemed to urge her to continue. "I've spent so much of my life running from silence," she continued, "always filling every moment with noise, conversations, distractions, busyness. I thought that if I kept myself busy, I wouldn't have to face what was inside me. But now I realize that silence isn't the enemy. Silence is where I find the truth about myself." Mr. Len nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. He had always known that true healing didn't come from filling the void, but from sitting with it, allowing it to be. Silence had a way of revealing things we often avoided. "I started taking time each day," she said, her voice steady now, "just to sit in silence, to let my thoughts come and go without judgment. And something strange happened. I found that in the silence, I didn't need to rush to fix everything. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to listen. To myself, to my heart." She turned to him, her eyes bright with a newfound understanding. "I'm not perfect. I'm still learning, but for the first time I feel at peace with who I am. I don't need to be anyone else. I don't need to chase after approval. I just need to be myself." The healing power of stillness. Mr. Len smiled, a quiet pride in his heart. He had known from the moment she first sat beside him that she was on the path to healing. It wasn't about quick fixes or grand gestures. It was about embracing the stillness, the quiet moments that allowed her to reconnect with herself. The woman took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, as though savoring the calmness she had found. "You were right," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "The answers don't come from other people. They come from within. And the silence, it's not a void to fear. It's a space to grow." Mr. Len didn't respond with words. There was nothing more to say. The silence between them was full of understanding, full of wisdom. For the first time, the woman felt truly seen, not because someone else had fixed her, but because she had learned to listen to herself. And in that listening, she had found the strength she had always been searching for. She stood up slowly, a smile on her face that radiated peace. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me that it's okay to be still, that I don't have to constantly be doing something to be worth something." Mr. Len gave her a small nod, his eyes warm with approval. "You've always had that strength inside you," he said quietly. "You just needed to hear it." She smiled again, a smile that was now full of self-assurance. She turned and walked away, her steps lighter than when she had arrived. She didn't need anything more from him. She had found what she came for, not in his words, but in the silence. As she disappeared into the distance, Mr. Len sat back on the bench, feeling a sense of quiet joy settle in his chest. The world continued around him, but for a moment, everything was still. And in that stillness, he realized that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from what we do, but from what we allow ourselves to be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the park, painting the benches and the trees in shades of gold. The park, usually filled with the sounds of people, felt quieter today, as though it was waiting for something important to happen. And as always, Mr. Len sat on his familiar bench, his worn notebook resting on his lap, the small sign hanging gently from his neck. Free counseling, listening to all ages. It was a peaceful day, the kind of day when people took their time, walking slowly and reflecting on their lives. But today, there was a young man who approached the bench, a man who had been walking through life as if he were invisible, always on the edge of something, but never quite touching it. He was in his 20s, his face a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. His steps were heavy, and his eyes seemed to be constantly scanning the ground, avoiding the world around him. He stopped when he saw the old man sitting on the bench. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he should sit or continue walking. But something in the old man's calm demeanor seemed to call to him, so he took a step forward and sat down beside him. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The young man stared ahead, his hands clenched in his lap, his fingers tapping nervously. Mr. Len didn't rush him, didn't ask him what was wrong. He just sat quietly, waiting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the young man spoke, his voice barely audible. "I don't know why I'm here," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I'm stuck, like I'm invisible. No matter how hard I try, it's like I'm just fading into the background. I can't figure out who I am, what I want, or where I'm supposed to be, and it feels like everyone else has it all figured out." Mr. Len nodded slowly, his eyes focused on the young man's face. He didn't offer any immediate comfort or advice. He simply listened, allowing the young man to pour out his frustration without interruption. The young man continued, his voice shaky. "I've always been afraid to speak up, afraid to be noticed. I'm scared of failing, of making mistakes, so I just stay silent. I watch everyone else live their lives, and I just stand by, pretending that it doesn't bother me." Mr. Len didn't say anything. He just handed him his notebook, as he had done before with others. But this time there was something different in the way the young man looked at it. It wasn't just a notebook now. It felt like a lifeline. He opened the notebook, his fingers trembling as he read the words Mr. Len had written. "Your voice matters. Don't be afraid to use it." The young man stared at the words for a long time. Something inside him shifted, as if those words had awakened a part of him that had been dormant for years. He wasn't sure why, but in that moment, he felt like he could finally breathe again. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was disappearing. He felt like he could stand tall, like he had something to say. "I've never really thought about it that way," he said, his voice steadier now. "I've always been so afraid of being wrong that I didn't even try to speak. But maybe I've been wrong about that. Maybe I've been holding myself back all along." Mr. Len gave him a soft smile, one that said more than words could express. He didn't need to give advice. He didn't need to fix anything. He just needed to be there to witness this moment of realization. The young man looked at Mr. Len, his eyes now filled with something that had been missing before, hope. "I don't know what's next," he said quietly, "but I think I'm ready to try. I think I'm ready to start using my voice, even if I'm scared." Mr. Len nodded, his heart full. He had seen this moment countless times, in different forms. The moment when someone realized they had been holding themselves back, and when they finally found the courage to step forward. The young man stood up, a little taller than when he had arrived. He looked at the old man one last time, his face full of gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice full of sincerity. I think you have helped me find something I didn't even know I was looking for. Mr. Len watched him walk away, his heart swelling with quiet pride. It wasn't about fixing people. It was about giving them the space to find their own answers. He had done that for the young man, and now the young man was walking toward a future where his voice would finally be heard. The park had quieted down, the day's warmth fading as the sun sank lower into the horizon. The benches were less crowded, and the usual hum of activity had softened into a peaceful calm. The breeze rustled the leaves above, and the air felt light with the promise of another still evening. Mr. Len sat on his usual bench, his worn notebook open in his lap, but his mind was far from the page in front of him. He had seen so many people come and go, their stories unfolding before him like pages of a book. But something about today felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he had a sense that someone was about to return. As if on cue, the woman who had once found her voice, the one who had learned to embrace her silence and listen to herself, walked into the park. Her presence was different this time, steadier, more grounded, as though the last few weeks had given her strength she hadn't known she had. She walked up to the bench, the same bench where she had first spoken her truth, the same bench where Mr. Len had listened to her fears, her doubts, and her frustrations. But today there was a calm in her steps, a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. She sat down beside him without hesitation, a soft smile forming on her face as she turned toward the old man. Mr. Len smiled back, his heart warming as he recognized a change in her. It wasn't the same young woman who had come here weeks ago, unsure and uncertain. No, this was someone new, someone who had found her own strength and was now carrying it with her. How are you today? Mr. Len asked, his voice soft. She looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. I'm good, she said, her voice steady. I'm really good. She paused, then added, I came back today because I realized something. I've been so focused on finding my own voice, on learning to speak up for myself, that I didn't realize how much I've been missing out on by not listening to others. Mr. Len nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. He knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't enough to speak your truth. Sometimes the real strength came from being able to listen, not just to others, but to the world around you, to the people who were trying to find their way, just as she had. I've been so wrapped up in my own journey, she continued, that I forgot how important it is to be present for others, to truly listen, not just hear them, but really listen to what they're saying, what they're feeling. Mr. Len smiled gently. You've come a long way. She nodded, the weight of his words settling in her heart. I think I finally understand that listening is just as powerful as speaking, maybe even more so, because when you listen, you give others the space to be heard. You give them the gift of being seen. The old man didn't respond with words. He simply sat there, letting the silence speak for itself. And in that silence, the woman understood. She had learned so much in her own journey, but today she was realizing the deeper meaning of listening, not just to herself, but to others too. She looked at Mr. Len again, her eyes shining with appreciation. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank you for showing me the way. I've learned to listen to myself, but now I see that there's so much more I can give by listening to others. Mr. Len smiled, his heart full of pride. He had always known that the real power of healing wasn't in offering answers or advice. It was in giving people the space to find their own truth, to speak their own story, and to be heard. She stood up slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her posture confident. Before she left, she turned back to him, a smile of deep gratitude on her face. I'll keep listening, she said softly, to myself and to those around me. I think that's the real way to heal. Mr. Len watched her walk away, her steps light and purposeful. She had come full circle, from finding her voice to learning the strength that came from listening. And as he sat back on the bench, he realized that this too was part of the healing process. To speak, to listen, to give and receive, it was all interconnected, all part of the same journey. The park was growing quieter, the last few visitors beginning to leave. But Mr. Len didn't feel lonely. He felt connected more than ever before. He had listened, he had given, and now he had seen the beauty in watching others find their own way. The park had reached the quiet part of the day. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange hue over the trees, the benches, and the paths. The world was slowing down, and for a moment, it seemed like time itself had decided to take a breath. Mr. Len sat on his bench, the old sign hanging around his neck. Free counseling, listening to all ages. His notebook rested on his lap, but for the first time in many days, he didn't feel the need to open it. Today, there would be no words. He had been sitting here for years, listening to the stories of countless souls who had come and gone, searching for peace, searching for understanding. Some left with answers, some left with questions still in their hearts, but each of them left with something, a small piece of healing, a moment of clarity, a space where they had been allowed to speak their truth. But today, the park was almost an empty. The usual bustle of activity had faded, leaving only a few late-day wanderers lingering in the fading light. The last visitor, and then she arrived. A woman not much older than 50 stepped softly into the park, her face a mixture of calm and weariness. She didn't seem to have a specific destination in mind, her steps slow, as though she was simply moving through space and time without urgency. She glanced around as if looking for something she couldn't quite place, and when her eyes landed on the old man sitting on the bench, she paused. There was a brief moment of hesitation, as though she wasn't sure whether she should approach or continue on her way. But something seemed to pull her in, as though her feet had a mind of their own. She walked slowly over to the bench and sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the city. There was no pressure, no need for words. The old man simply sat beside her, letting the quiet embrace both of them. The power of silence. After a long time she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know why I came," she said, her voice almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I don't really need advice. I'm not even sure I need anyone to listen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing." Mr. Len didn't respond, but his heart stirred. He recognized something in her, something that felt familiar. She was like many others who had come to the bench over the years, seeking something they couldn't define. "I've spent so many years keeping everything inside," she continued, her voice now quieter, more reflective, "trying to be strong, trying to hold everything together. But I've realized that in all this time, I haven't really felt anything. I've been so busy trying to fix everything for everyone else that I forgot how to be kind to myself." The woman let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping slightly. She was tired, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Mr. Len didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to offer her a solution or tell her what to do. He simply let her words fill the air, allowing her to release what had been weighing on her. "I think what I'm really searching for is peace," she whispered, almost as if the words themselves were a revelation. "But I don't know how to find it. I don't know how to stop fighting. The healing of acceptance. Mr. Len finally turned to her, his eyes filled with the quiet understanding that only years of listening could bring. He pulled his notebook from his lap, but instead of writing, he simply handed it to her. The woman looked at the notebook, confused for a moment, but then took it from his hands. On the first page, there was a simple sentence, written in his familiar, neat handwriting. You don't need to fight anymore. Let the peace come to you. For a moment, the woman stared at the words, her heart catching in her throat. The simplicity of the sentence hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so long trying to control everything, trying to fix all the broken pieces of her life, that she had never given herself the permission to stop, to let go, to allow peace to find her. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She simply let it fall, as though it had been waiting to be released. Thank you, she whispered, looking at Mr. Len with a soft smile, for reminding me that it's okay to let go. I've been so focused on the fight that I've forgotten how to find peace in the quiet. Mr. Len smiled back, his heart full. He didn't need to say anything. He knew that she had found the answer she was seeking. Sometimes the greatest healing didn't come from answers, but from the space to simply be, to be still, to breathe, to let go of the need to fix everything. The woman stood, her shoulders lighter than they had been when she arrived. She gave Mr. Len one last look, her eyes filled with gratitude, and then she walked away, her steps calm and steady. The last gift of silence. As she disappeared into the park, Mr. Len sat back on the bench, his heart full. The world around him continued, the park still alive with people coming and going. But for him, in this moment, everything was still. He had listened, and that was enough. He closed his eyes, feeling the soft warmth of the fading sun on his skin. The stories, the people, the moments, they would continue as they always had. But for now, for this one moment, there was only peace, and it was enough.